Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith and right next to me is my lovely co-host, the Chattering Teacup.
Hello.
And here with us for episode 55, our guest A.L. Brooks. Hello and welcome to Book Lovers Companion.
Hello. It's lovely to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you on our show. You are well versed in doing podcasts, as we have said before we started the recording.
Done a few, yeah.
Or as we say in German, ein alter Hase. Or would it be Häsin? We don't know.
Was weiß ich?
Was weiß ich? Exactly. Who knows? Okay. You live in Frankfurt, but before that you've also lived in Aberdeen and Australia.
Mm-hmm.
You're originally
I have indeed.
Yeah, you're originally from London.
Not quite, but yeah, I lived most of my life in London. Yes.
And you love really dark chocolate.
I do.
That's why we opted for a 85% one. But
yes, we're not going to mention the fact that you're eating dark chocolate in front of me when I don't have any.
Sorry.
That's
yeah. We won't also mention that we are drinking rum as well in front of you. So we never said it. You also like craft beer, and most importantly, and the reason why we are here, why we are talking, is that your new book is out, Chasing Dreams.
Yes. Out last week, out this week by the time the listeners hear this, it will be out on Amazon. But, yeah.
It's not your first book, is it? I mean, you have quite a number of books under your belt,
Indeed.
Haven't you?
Yeah. That is quite amazing to myself, actually.
Now, let me list them for our listeners. There is The Club, Miles Apart, Dark Horse, The Long Shot, Write Your Own Script, Never Too Late for Heroes, Up on the Roof, Dare to Love, A Heart to Trust, and The Club Revisited. So far, I have read Up on the Roof, which I enjoyed tremendously. And
Good.
the Teacup has read another one. Which one did you read, Teacup?
Write Your Own Script.
Oh, okay.
It's a nice one.
Yeah. Well, Up on the Roof was also a nice one. A lot happened in Up on the Roof. Poor woman.
Yes.
In that one. I
did feel a bit mean giving her all that to deal with, but
yeah, it was, to be honest. And two of them, at least that's what I found, have been translated into German as well.
Yeah, that is correct.
Up on the Roof and Dare to Love.
Genau.
So let's talk about Chasing Dreams. Tell us about this book. What was the idea? What about your characters? As much as you can tell us without giving too much away, of
without
course.
Too many spoilers.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So Chasing Dreams is an enemies to lovers romance. It's set in a made-up town in Oregon in the US called Eagle Cove, where Ruby, the local librarian, who is beloved by everybody in the town, has been saving very hard to buy an old abandoned ranch where she's going to hopefully set up an animal shelter because she has looked after animals her entire life and she loves them. But waltzing into town, unbeknown to Ruby, is Claire, who has until very recently been a venture capitalist in the finance markets in New York. She's a little bit of an ice queen, little bit crispy on the outside, and she has had a dream for a while now to open a women-only guest house in some beautiful part of the country. And she's done a lot of hiking, and she loved the Oregon hills around Crater Lake and the Pacific Crest Trail. So, unbeknown to Ruby, Claire buys this ranch house, the one that Ruby had wanted. And for Claire, it's a bit of a baptism of fire because she's never lived in a small town. She spent her entire life in New York. And as much as she's visited small towns and loved them, of course, living somewhere is quite different. As we were talking earlier, it's quite different to live somewhere, but it is to visit as a tourist.
Yep.
And of course, she's effectively stolen, in inverted commas, this property from the beloved Ruby. So she has her work cut out for her to not only make friends with the rest of the town, but to actually get Ruby to even talk to her and give her the time of day. But of course, the more they do talk, the more they realise there's a little bit of a spark between them, ...
Do they just talk or do they also, fight?
There's definitely some fighting.
but no bitch slapping.
No, nothing like that. No physical fighting. There's a lot of words exchanged, and there's a lot of snarkiness, and there's a lot of bad temper from Ruby because she's so mad at Claire for stealing this homestead. And then, of course, this is only a tiny spoiler. Ruby realizes actually what she's really mad at is herself because she waited too long to follow her dream. So it's all about following your dreams and being bold enough to follow them and taking your opportunities when they come.
And this one is set in the United States, like you said.
It is, yeah.
That's quite a different setting. I mean, from the one I read and from the one the Teacup read.
Yeah, I've written books in various. I've written one set in Australia, Dark Horse. I've written half a dozen or so in the UK, and another 3 or 4, whatever it is now I'm up to, in the US. And I choose the location. The location often is secondary to the story and the characters, but it also plays a key role. So, for example, Chasing Dreams, I could have set that in the UK. I could have set it in a very small town in the UK, but I really needed the remoteness of where this town is and the fact that it is super small and it's set in this amazing wilderness. And it just seemed that would be a little bit easier to do if it was set in the vastness of America, because, America is significantly bigger than the UK. Whereas Write Your Own Script, that to me was when I thought of the character of Tamsin Harris, she was always a British actress and it was always going to be set in England as a result. Other things, some books I could have transposed between the UK or the US, I think, quite easily. But for me, it's always about where the story comes from. For example, Chasing Dreams literally started from one scene that popped into my head out of nowhere one day when I was sitting working, and I had to write this scene down on my phone before I forgot it. And it's the scene at the very beginning where Claire gets the phone call from her real estate agent saying, "I think I found you the perfect property." And I don't know why. I have no idea why, but this scene popped into my head of someone who was really stuck in their job, who was really fed up with their corporate lifestyle. Suddenly being given the phone call from someone they had tasked with finding them this property, and this person saying, "I found it," and how that would instantly change your life. That's what popped into my head, and then a whole book came out of it. So,
but she has already taken the first step in asking someone to find.
Yes, she has. Yeah. She's known this is what she wants to do, but she's still stuck in this career in New York, and she's quite high up and she's quite high paid, and she has no time. She spends her entire life in meetings. So it's again the thing about how much effort do you need to put into finding your dream. She's been sitting back earning all this money, having this dream but not doing it, and eventually thinks, do you know what, I need to get on with this, but still accepts that she can't do all of it herself. So she hires someone to help her, she's in that privileged position where she can do that. She can hire someone to do the searching for her and find the property for her.
Whereas the other person is the one that doesn't make the step to actually change her life. So they clash because of that, probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's a very personal question, I suppose, because you also work in the financial sector yourself.
Yeah.
Would you say that is something occasionally that you experience yourself, that you earn money, but you have no time spending it for yourself? What is it good for?
I'll be perfectly honest. I'm kind of stuck in that frame of mind at the moment. I've worked a very long time. I've always worked in finance generally. And I'm at that age now and stage of my life where I would love to just give all that up. I'd actually love to write full time, but I don't earn enough off the writing full time to make up for the money that I would earn in finance. And it's kind of this catch-22. You still need to pay the bills. You still need to eat, kind of important things. And unfortunately, I'm not in that position. I don't have that luxury to do that. I am considering some of my options, and I'm hoping in the next few years that I can make some of those come about. But a lot of that part of Claire's story was definitely coming from a bit of personal feeling about what it's like to be working in that corporate world for that long and feeling like, well, is this all I'm ever going to do? Something has to change. I wrote it that Claire was lucky enough that she could make it change.
And which character was easier to write? Maybe both of them were, but which character for you was easier to write or get into? Claire, since she has quite a few things in common with you, or Ruby?
Yeah, both for different reasons. Claire, because of the commonalities and having that, and I realise there's a theme in a lot of my books. I do write people who work in an office environment because I know that. I've done that for however many years I've done it now. So I often write characters who work in a corporate environment. So in that respect, Claire was easy to write. And also that idea about wanting to chase your dream and realize your dream was easy for me to write for Claire. But equally, Ruby was easy to write because she's such a nice spirit. It's lovely to write a character like that who has such a heart of gold. Yes, she's got a temper, but, and she's such a caring person. And she, I mean, again, it's not a spoiler. She looks after her grandpa, who she lives with, Ned. And writing that emotion from her, how she feels about her grandpa and how she feels about living with him and looking after him, was just lovely to write, to really get into that. Like, I don't have any living grandparents anymore, but to get into how would it feel to look after a grandparent and stay with them all that time. Was super fun to write.
So since we both have not yet read this book, would you say that her grandpa is a sort of golden boy?
Oh, what? Sorry?
A sort of golden boy, a bit like, let's say, Betty White-like golden girl, golden boy kind of type?
Yeah, he is. He's very much, he's not the Betty White character, though. He's more like the B. Arthur character, Dorothy. He's very, he doesn't take any prisoners, and he tells Ruby exactly how it is. Yeah, he was good fun to write. I mean, I always love writing elderly relatives. I've written them in quite a few of my books, and I love them because they've got no filters anymore, and I'm like, that's how I'm going to be. And you can have so much fun with that. Yeah. So much fun because, that, they're just happy to say what they want to say. And they don't care about the consequences. Yes. It's brilliant.
Something to look forward to when we're getting old.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
To say what you want to say and just give a about it. Yeah. Give a toss about it.
I'm totally going to be wheeling around on my electric wheelchair, just giving it I can't wait.
You said you needed the setting of the remoteness of the United States. Did you feel, the connection between setting it in the United States and making those characters American, was that difficult or did it feel easy? Because, you are European, so are we. Get into the heads of someone who has the experience of being American.
Yeah, obviously I've been exposed to a lot of American, TV, film, media for my entire life. Pretty much most of what I grew up watching on TV was American. That doesn't mean I can understand the American experience particularly, but it gives you a kind of good head start. But I'm very fortunate in that 2 of my beta readers are American. So one of their tasks each time is to pick up on whether I am speaking with an American voice. Am I grabbing the nuances of being American versus being British? And they've been brilliant at that, educating me in, the thinking of Americans and the phrasing of Americans and, just general culture. There's a scene, this is not a spoiler, there's a scene in the book where Ruby is in the local diner having lunch. And I had originally written it that she was sharing her booth with 2 hikers who had just come off the trail. And it wasn't until my American beta readers got hold of it, and they said, you do realise Americans would never do that. We do not share tables with strangers. And I was like, I did not know that. Because in Britain, if there was the only 2 spaces left in a cafe was at another table, you'd go, excuse me, do you mind if I sit here? And they'd go, no, it's fine. Yeah. But apparently not in America. So I just had to gently, easily reword that. But this is the kind of thing that I would never know from a cultural perspective. And that's where beta readers and to a further extent, sensitivity readers are incredibly important when you're writing outside of your known area, whether that's geographical or sexual orientation or race, whatever it is. So, yeah, I'm quite lucky with that.
And has there been another surprise for you? Except from the table sharing, which you never thought of?
I can't think of one off the top of my head, but if I do, I'll come back to it. Yeah.
And what about the language? You have the supposedly same language, the same with Germany as Germany and Austria, but upon a closer look, you realize...
Obviously there's some differences. Yeah, it's things like the piece of concrete on the side of the road we call a pavement, Americans call it a sidewalk. But again, from being exposed to so much American culture, a lot of those words are in my head anyway, even if I wouldn't use them on a daily basis. But there's always this this word that Americans use, which is just so wrong to my English ears, but I know it's very American, which is instead of saying she looked at the book she had got yesterday, she looked at the book she had gotten yesterday. So gotten, Gotten, is just not in British English, but it is very much in American English. And having to keep remembering to use that instead. And I keep getting caught out, and my beta readers keep going, in their Word version of my document, you need to change this to gotten, you need to change this to gotten. But that's one thing that's just never going to stick in my British head, I don't think.
Well, through me once when I wrote a fan fiction story, and I used the word rubber.
Oh yeah,
throwing a rubber.
And you meant an eraser, didn't you? Not a condom.
Yeah, exactly. And I thought, what's wrong with the word? That's how I learned it. I mean, I'm not a native speaker of English, but that's what we learned at school. We learned British English, so I used it correctly, I might add. But
for the situation, but
the American readers understood it in a different way.
Yes, exactly. Yes. It was an eye-opener.
Regarding the language in this book, is only the direct spoken language American? Or the complete book?
The complete book. Yeah. So whenever I set, and it's the same, I think, for a lot of novelists, whenever you set a book in America, you really need the entire tone to be from America. Same as if you wrote a book in Australia, you need to write with an Australian mindset, with the sort of the phrasing of Australia. And I could do that with Dark Horse because I lived in Australia in total for about 18 months. So I definitely had picked up on, how Australians spoke and how they would phrase things.
And I also wanted to ask you, is there also an age gap in this story or not at all? No.
Not really, no. I think I haven't actually said Ruby's age, but she's around 37 and Claire's around 42, 43. So it's not much. Yeah.
And you said there was this scene that came to you all of a sudden. It popped up in your head and you knew that that's it. That's the question. Are you a planner? Or a pantser?
It kind of depends. Some stories come to me in a way in my head that I don't actually have to plot it out and write it out scene by scene. Write Your Own Script was a good example of that one. That one fell out of my head in about 2.5 months without writing down hardly any notes whatsoever. Chasing Dreams, I did do a plot for because I was going through a really busy time with the pandemic and with work, and was feeling that maybe plotting would help me focus. And similarly with the one I just finished writing, my next one, which comes out next year, I did it. That's the most detailed I've ever plotted a book. I loved the story that I wanted to put together, but I was definitely feeling the effects of the pandemic in terms of mental health and feeling quite stressed. And I thought, if I don't plot this out and actually make this make sense up front, I'm going to write garbage. So, and I mean, some books I've not plotted at all, and I've been really happy with the result. Only once did I plot something and deviated completely. And conversely, only once have I not planned something and then got halfway through and gone, this is so not working. I need to plot this out again, and had to rewrite chunks of it because it just trying to write it off the bat was not going to work. So it does depend on what the story idea is and whether how much it's kind of seems to be already in my head, and therefore I can just get it out without actually having to. Sometimes it's just a case of scribbling, this is the beginning, this is the middle, this is the end, and then I'm just going to join them up. And of course, often the characters take over, and I'm not the only author who's said this. It's just you start writing and you're in the middle of a scene and suddenly it goes off in a different direction and you're like, where did that come from? But that's where the characters went, and when you've read it, you're like, yeah, that totally makes sense. That is much better than what I originally thought I would do with this scene. So
over the last years, at least one book was published each year. Were some of them already written, or are you that fast?
No, I'm generally that fast. The only one that we got ahead of the game with was The Club Revisited. I actually wrote that. I'd actually only just finished writing that, and Ilva said there was a slot that could open up for it. That was the quickest I've ever got one out to market. I mean, I'd literally wrote it in a couple of months at the beginning of last year, and we got it out at the end of last year. The others, I mean, in the beginning, when I was first writing, I had no idea if I was even going to get published. So, I mean, I just wrote stuff and then said to Ilva, here it is. Do you like it? Now we worked a slightly better schedule, slightly more professional. Now I know my next one is going to be published next March, but I've only just finished writing it because we've had that kind of schedule that we've been working towards. Other things, I mean, I've got a few stories that I've already started, and I've got 2 or 6 chapters written in them, and I kind of know where they want to go. But for whatever reason, the mood has not continued with that one. So I've set it to one side, and I'll probably come back, or I may not, you know. And it could be that, I mean, one year, was it 2019? Yes, when I first moved to Frankfurt, I didn't work for the first year. I took a year out because I really needed a break. And I needed to settle into the country and learn some of the language. And I actually sat and wrote 2.5 books in that year, which was a lot. And I'm not sure I'd do that again, even if I was writing full time, because that was a bit full on. But it did mean that I had a lot of material that then I could hand over to my publisher, and we could schedule, you know, some publishing dates for. And it's why I ended up with 2 books quite close together when Never Too Late for Heroes came out and Dare to Love came out a couple of months later. It just, that was the best way it worked for them. And they were already written, so let's do it, you know, that kind of thing. Yeah. I think my job's just got busier the last year now that I do work. And so my writing time is less. So I think it's always going to be a case now of sort of 1 a year is what's going to happen. But it'll be something that I've planned well in advance, you know.
And I also wanted to ask you about being a published author by a publishing house. We had a lot of indie authors on our show.
Yes. I listened to your one that you did with KJ, where she talked about the process for her. Yeah.
It was great talking to her. It was fun.
Yeah. She's lovely.
Yeah, she is. Absolutely. And I think I asked her the same question. Did you send out your manuscripts to publishing houses, or did they just, like for her, come to you?
No, kind of a completely different story, actually. So I first wrote what turned out to be 2 of the chapters of the club back in 2014. It was my first time of writing again after many, many years. I had been completely blocked and not interested. And then I was off work sick with a chest infection for 3 weeks. And I don't know why the idea popped into my head, but it suddenly did. And the next thing I knew, I'd written 6,000 words of the first chapter of the club. And then I had written 2 chapters, and I happened to see on Facebook a few months later that Ilva Publishing were going to be represented at an authors event, author reader event in England, up near Manchester, funnily enough, and that they would be having open pitch sessions. You could bring your manuscript along and someone would look at it and give you some ideas. You know, was it any good? Were you completely insane to think that you could be a writer? Please go away. You know, no, I'm sure they wouldn't have ever said that to anybody. But I thought, well, I like what I've written, and I literally have no idea if it's worth publishing. At that point, I was thinking I'd publish it myself, because I couldn't imagine a publisher picking me up, because I was kind of out of nowhere. But I booked myself a slot for this open pitch session, and they said to me, "That's great. Any chance, if you got anything written, that you could send us in advance, and we'll just have a little read through beforehand before we meet you." So I sent them the 2 chapters, and I said, "This is kind of what I'm working on, something a little bit sexy." And so I went to the event, and actually who I was paired with was Andrea Brammell, who is another Ilva author who's written various mysteries and fabulous things. And I nearly fell off my chair because she sat down and she said, "This is brilliant. We love it." And I went, "What?" I mean, I honestly went there thinking they would say, "Well, you know, it's kind of a nice idea, but you really need to work on this and you need to do that." And you know, I genuinely thought that. I never for a minute thought that I would walk out of there with basically the promise of a publishing contract, because that's what I got. They said, "Can you turn this into a novel? Can you give us 60,000 words instead of the 10,000 that you've written?" And I went, "Yeah, pretty sure I can." And off I went. And that was it. That's how I got published.
Great.
And that was just the most amazing experience, because, as I say, I was all geared up to just push it out on Kindle myself, you know, on Amazon, and just see what happened. And I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about editors or copy editors or cover designers, proofreaders, none of it, you know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the next thing I know, I've got a publishing contract. And the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah. It is indeed.
12 books later, here we are.
Yeah, exactly. And also, sorry.
You started, it seems, before erotica, and then you turned to romance. Was this planned, or just the way it turned out, or...?
Not planned, just a case of what came into my head. As soon as I'd finished writing the club, I had the idea to write something set in Australia as a little homage to my time in Australia, because I absolutely loved living there. And I didn't have any ideas at the time for anything that was pure erotica again. And obviously, by that time, I'd got to know lots of Ilva authors. I'd been to a couple of events, and it was very obvious that people were writing all sorts of stuff, and I was reading avidly. I mean, I'd only just rediscovered lesbian fiction a couple of years before, having been a huge fan of it when I first came out of the closet 25 years before, and then for various reasons didn't read it again. And I was devouring all these different genres: the romance, the fantasy, the erotica, crime, mystery, anything except horror, basically. I'm not a fan of horror at all. And I loved all these romances. And I sat there, after I'd finished the club, I started thinking, I think I could write a romance now, And then the idea for Dark Horse came to me, and I sat down and wrote it, and Ilva published it. And I was like, okay, I can write a romance. All right. So now, I mean, I've written mostly romances, but I do have other ideas for eroticas. I mean, erotica is not a big selling market. It's a niche within a niche. I mean, romance is the big thing. I do love writing romances, but I'll be honest, there's a lot of time where I feel like I'm writing romances because I know that's what's going to sell. It's not that I don't enjoy what I'm writing, but it's just, if you want to sell books, you need to write romance. That's just the way of the world. But I'm fortunate because my publisher loves my erotica as well. So I get to publish that as well.
Do you feel, or are you afraid that you get pigeonholed?
I did worry about that. And I wonder if that's subconsciously why I didn't write the sequel to The Club for as long as I did. Because I think there was a lot of people that felt that the erotica was the way I would go. And I think I kind of wanted to prove that it wasn't everything about me, which is why I did write, quite a few more romances before I wrote the erotica.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I always wanted to bring the sexy stuff into my romances. I mean, that's just who I am. That's what I write. There's literally only one book that has not got any sex in it, which is Never Too Late for Heroes. It didn't fit that story. It just wasn't necessary. But all of my other romances are definitely going to have sex scenes in them all the time. And, I know I've got a nice name for myself for writing good sexy scenes, so why not put them into the romances? But yeah, I am actually, with hindsight, glad that I held off on writing the sequel to The Club as long as I did, because I think if I'd have pushed that out as my second book, I think then I would have been pigeonholed as an erotica, and then I think it would have been harder to break into the romance market. Now I feel like I've got a really nice balance as being known for good romances as well as good erotica, which is great.
Is there a genre within the lesfic community you would like to explore? You said you're not a fan of horror, but are there other genres that tickle your interest?
I definitely like the idea of writing something crime related, and I do actually have an idea for that, but it would take a huge amount of research to do it properly for the story that I have in mind, and I have no time for that research right now. So that is definitely going to have to wait until something changes with my working situation, i.e. I retire, or I manage to cut down my hours somehow, or I win the lottery, which is my grand plan. Plan A is win the lottery. So yeah, no, I would definitely like to dabble in crime. And I mean, I grew up, my late teens, early 20s, mid 20s all I read was sci-fi fantasy, in particular high fantasy. So the David Eddings books, the Belgariad and the Malloreon, Tolkien, the Lord of the Rings, obviously. Oh, huge numbers of books that I can't even remember now. But I literally read fantasy for about 8 years and nothing else. And yeah, there's a part of me that thinks, God, wouldn't it be fun to write one of those? I mean, I don't think I could write a series, but like a standalone. But have it totally queer, obviously. And, the men would definitely be secondary to the women. Not that not against men, but I just feel like there's so many fantasy books that are male-centered that it's so nice to see female-centered ones really making a play in the market now. And I'd love to add to that. So yeah, you never know. You never know.
Something like Janeway or No Way.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I love Fletcher Delancey's series.
Yeah.
The Alcea Chronicles, I just think is awesome. And it's so female-centered. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, so, I have to start on that one because I've read her fan fiction series she had. That was great. That was a great series.
Those books, I think there's 10 of them now. And they're literally just awesome.
I'm way behind.
Yeah.
I have not even started number 1. It's up there on the shelf.
For some time now, yeah.
Yeah, for some time now. It's this time flies.
Jobs get in the way.
Yeah, same here. Real life tends to get in the way.
We should start playing the lottery.
Yeah. Yes, we definitely should. Come to think of it. Absolutely. And you said you would be interested in crime writing, and you would have to do a lot of research. So would that be, if you really would try that, would it be settled completely in the lesfic genre, or have you also thought about writing crime fiction and giving your character a lesbian background, just like with Murray?
Yeah, I think it would be more along those lines, that there obviously would be a lesbian character. I'm just going to put that in because that's me. That's what I want to write. But the fact that she's lesbian is kind of going to be secondary to the actual story of the crime. Yeah, I mean, I like reading both. I love reading good crime books where it just so happens that the leading woman is queer. And equally, I love reading mainstream crime books, as long as the crime story is really well written. I don't actually need, for me, I don't need a romance in my crime books. I know a lot of people still want to see a romance in there. I don't necessarily need that. I like to read a good mystery that keeps me ticking along. Yep. But I will say I love it if the main protagonist happens to be a queer woman, because then I just feel a little bit more, it's a bit more relatable for me. So, yeah.
Since you've been writing for quite a while and you are, again, a published author with a lot of books under your belt, what about the crime writing community? What about your experience? Are there any experiences? Are they good? Are they not so good? Or if any at all? Because one of our guests, J.E. Leek, said she was glad to have this community, to have found them and to exchange ideas and such.
Yeah, it's not something I've even looked into yet, because I feel like I'm so far off from writing this book. It really is on the back burner, that it's not something I've looked into. But I do know that it is a very big community, and I do know it's a very supportive community. So if I ever get the time or the energy to actually delve into that, then yeah, I would absolutely be reaching out to that community, for just not necessarily begging for advice, but just to observe what everyone else is going through and what they're talking about. I mean, I've definitely limited myself at the moment, for want of a better word, to just within the lesfic community, the sapphic community, because that's just what I want to write right now, and it's what I'm loving writing. But yeah, I mean, same with, if I ever went into writing a fantasy book, then I would definitely be looking into the fantasy community to see if there's, what kind of support and help you can get there. I mean, my experience of the sapphic community is that we all are very supportive, and it's brilliant. I love it. It's, I love being part of that, that we're always happy to offer advice to new people coming into this. There's so many times you see a post in a Facebook group where someone says, "Oh, I'm new to writing and I'm not quite sure, should I use Scrivener or Word or something else?" And you get like 53 responses from people going, "Oh, well, I use this one and it does this and this and this and this." The other one going, "Yeah, that's really good, but I use this." And it's like, this poor woman just put this little post in and got this massive, great response back. But isn't that fabulous? Because then she's got loads of advice about how to get started with a particular piece of software. Never mind anything else about the writing process. Because we all seem to want to just encourage everybody. And I think that's fabulous. I love that there's next to no competition in our community. It's all supportive. And that's just brilliant. Absolutely brilliant.
And what about meeting people in person? I mean, it has been on the back burner the last few years, because we all know why that is. But before that and in the future, I mean...
I've done quite a few events and I absolutely love it. I love meeting people face to face, other authors and readers. I mean, I've fangirled over so many people. When I went to one GCLS con in 2018, I went to Las Vegas, and I just sat in this room and I was like, okay, I'm here as an author, and I had like, I don't know, 4 books published by then. So some people knew who I was, and that was lovely. But mostly I was there as a fangirl. I was at the signing session. We did the signing session at the last day, where all the authors sit around a big room in alphabetical order. And I found myself sat next to Georgia Beers. And I'm just sitting there going, "It's Georgia Beers. Oh, my God." It was just brilliant. You just think, God, I've come out of nowhere. And I'm sat next to these people who've been writing. I actually got to meet my, I don't know, not hero, that's not the right word, but my inspiration, if you like. I got to meet Catherine V. Forrest. She wrote Curious Wine.
Yes.
The first lesbian fiction book I ever read when I was fresh out of the closet. Curious Wine by Catherine V. Forrest. And it literally changed my life, because it made me see myself on the page, and it made me realise that all the feelings I had and all the desires I had were not wrong. because here was other people having exactly the same thing. And I got to meet her at the GCLS con, and I was nearly in tears. I was definitely in tears afterwards. I'm sure I babbled incessantly at her, and she probably thought, who is this mad British woman? But it was like, to have that interaction with people is incredible, absolutely incredible. And yeah, I've done a few events, and I can't wait for them to start up again properly. Unfortunately, I can't go to the GCLS con this year, and I'd really like to, because I think it'd be fantastic to meet everybody again now that traveling is so much easier. But I do have a good excuse. I'm getting married. So.
Congratulations.
But yeah, thank you. Next year, I definitely have GCLS in mind. And I know that my publisher has done events in Germany before pandemic times, in particular the Leipzig Book Fair, as well as the Frankfurt Buchmesse.
Okay.
So hopefully there'll be an opportunity to do those again, maybe next year.
Yes, because the Frankfurt Buchmesse has been cancelled again, I think. Hasn't it? This year?
I don't know, Frankfurt or Leipzig?
I thought
Frankfurt or Leipzig?
I think Leipzig was cancelled. That's the one that was cancelled.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I love it. That's why I love doing podcasts, and I love doing video Zoom things with people, because I just love that interaction with people. I love talking to other authors about what we do. And I love talking to readers as a reader as well as a writer. I mean, I can talk about books all day to anybody, you know, and I've said this on my Facebook profile. If you want to connect with me, please do, because I love talking about books. You don't have to talk about mine. We can talk about anybody else's. I'm a fan of so many writers and so many books that I'll happily talk about them all day.
And it's
good. That's good to know. So you are welcome again anytime. You feel like talking about books. Just say the word.
Good.
Because it's nice to talk to someone about books who likes books, because sometimes you start talking about a book and you realize
you see that glazed expression.
You see them falling asleep and you're like, oh, okay. Should we just talk about soap operas then? Yeah. I mean, this is the thing. I don't watch much TV. I watch a few select programs that I've had recommended to me, and a few films. I mean, literally, if someone said to me, you can never watch TV again, I'd be like, okay. As long as I could still read a book, I really wouldn't care.
Yep.
I love books that much, and I have done ever since I was a small child. I mean, I was an avid reader from the minute I could actually read. And to me, books are everything. They really are. They just take you so many different places. And I love it.
You're more involved when you read a book than compared to watching a show.
It's funny. I saw a really interesting quote today, and I can't think who shared it on Facebook, but it never even occurred to me before. This person had shared a quote from someone who said, books are so amazing because to every single person who reads the same book, they'll have a different experience. They'll picture the characters in a different way. They'll hear them in a different way, and they'll have a completely different experience. You could have 10 people reading the same book in a room, and they would all feel that book in a different way. And that's because, like you said, you're more involved in it. You have to sink yourself into it. Whereas TV and films, you're kind of a bit remote from somehow. Yeah.
It's more someone else's vision than it is with the book.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's also when you see a film or a TV show that's made after a book, and then you read the book, you always see the actors. Whereas when you read the book before that, it's your own imagination. How they
absolutely
look.
Yeah. And sometimes, there's quite often, I won't want to watch the movie or TV show of a book, especially if it's a book I've read, because I'm so worried it's going to get spoiled. And or that it's just not going to be how I envisioned it. Like you said, I'll have had this image in my head of how everything was. So there's a brilliant young adult fantasy series called The Dark is Rising by Susan Cooper. It was written 40 years ago, English writer. There's 5 books in the series. It's definitely aimed at like 12 to 15-year-old kids, I'd say. I love it. I've read it half a dozen times. It's absolutely brilliant. They made one of them into a movie, and I thought, okay, I'll give it I literally lasted 5 minutes before I had to switch it off, because I was like, nope, this is not how this is supposed to be. This is not how the character looks like. It was it was so wrong in my head because I love this book so much. So yeah, often I will not watch a film or movie based on a book.
So what about Carol?
I've never read the book.
That's different.
And it's funny because the first time I watched the film, I didn't enjoy it. And I watched it again before Christmas last year, and I loved it. And I think I realised that the first time I watched it, I was going through a breakup of a long-term relationship. I was having a whole reevaluation of life moment. And I realised that I wasn't in the right headspace to appreciate the beauty of that story. And yet I watched it just before Christmas a few months ago, and I cried my eyes out at the end, and I absolutely loved it, and I can't wait to watch it again. So, but whether I would like the book now, I don't know.
I've read the book before, and when I read the book, I thought, wouldn't it be great if it was a movie? And then...
So did you like the movie then?
Yeah.
If you'd read the book?
Yeah, I did. One of the few occasions. There are not many books, like you said, usually you are disappointed. Where I wasn't disappointed, another book was The Color Purple.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, again, I've not read the book, but I love the film.
Both are good. I think they've done it justice. And I have to say, since we love to read crime, also, okay, let's say, yes, the Miss Marple series with Joan Hickson. And again, my all-time favorite, also David Suchet as Poirot.
Oh, it's Poirot, yeah.
So that was quite good, actually.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you a little bit about the German translation of your books.
Yep.
How much, if at all, were you involved? Meaning, the translator, did they come back to you and ask for phrases or background or nothing at all?
Not for these two, no. There is another one being translated at the moment, and I don't expect to have any involvement because I don't speak German. So I'm kind of trusting that they're going to do, a good job. They're translators that Ilva are using all the time for their German books. So I assume that, there's a process there. Basically, as an English-speaking writing author, we don't have any say in the German translations because that's just, we wouldn't know.
No, what I meant,
I know obviously that, there's a...
what I meant was insofar as did the German translator ask you for certain expressions, clarifications, what you meant or something like that?
No, that hasn't happened so far. And much the same way with the audiobooks, it's all sold under license to Tantor to do the audiobooks. And so far, I've only had one audiobook narrator come back to me just to seek clarification on the pronunciation of names, in the book. But otherwise, no involvement.
Okay.
And I mean, I guess with being with a publishing company, that is one of the things that you kind of lose, for want of a better word, if you're self-published. Because I know that's one of the things KJ was talking about. You've got much more control over that because you're the one doing the ordering and stuff. But I mean, my publisher, they know what they're doing. I leave them to do it and trust them completely. So yeah.
So they also take care of the audiobooks, of the audiobook versions.
Yeah. They deal with Tantor Audio. And I just get the money.
Okay. It's interesting because when we spoke to CA for her audiobook versions, was interesting because she does it all on her own. I mean, she was looking for the narrator, and she also does it on her own money because it costs a lot. And
I know, I just can't imagine doing that because I know everyone talks about it costing at least 2,000 or 3,000 to.
But she wanted
get started.
To be very involved.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
I can also understand that as well. Yeah. They're your little babies. You get very protective of them. You don't want them to be ruined. And I mean, I've just been so fortunate with the narrators I've had for my audiobooks. They've been fantastic. I've absolutely loved them.
Yeah. And since you have written and have been published, what would be your advice for any aspiring author, be it in the less fic genre, be it in any other genre?
Yeah. I've actually answered this question somewhere else, and I'll say exactly the same again. Just write. Don't worry about whether you're writing anything brilliant and you have to write the bestseller of all bestsellers in your first draft. You don't. Just write. Just write what's in your head, write what you want to write, and get that first draft written. Then you can worry about polishing it up and whether it's, got a cat in chapter 3 that you never mention again, or a cat that suddenly appears in chapter 12 and was never heard of. That's the sort of thing you can worry about afterwards. Just write what you want to write, get it out of you, get it down on paper, get it writing. Because as soon as you get that flow going and get writing, you'll just have the most amazing experience. And don't worry about, am I doing this right? In inverted commas. There's no right way to write. You just do it, and then you get some people to read it and they'll tell you whether it's working or not. And then you get some more people to read it and, and then it just flows.
Can we not just say it was Schrödinger's cat? I mean, something
why
like
not?
that.
I did do that in the start of one of my books. I did have the character having a cat, and it was never mentioned again. And I got to the end of the book, and I was like, "What happened to the cat? What did I?" So I had to go back and write the cat out because I couldn't put the cat back in. It was just too complicated. So,
the cat, let's just say the cat moved to another city or something like that. It happens. Yeah. We've all heard about that. It
presumably wasn't getting fed, so it just left.
Yeah.
Moves out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And is there anything you would never touch upon in your books?
I'm never going to touch non-consensual sex. That's no. I can't imagine writing anything about sexual violence other than perhaps alluding to that in someone's past, but I'm never going to write it on the page. And I'm never going to write horror. I don't like all that blood and gore business. That's not for me. I get it in a crime novel where you need to describe a murder or a murder scene. That, for me, that's different. But horror where it's just, like that Friday the 13th stuff and the movies, the slasher movies, all that kind of stuff. No, never going to write that. Yeah. But I mean, I've written a book that had cheating in it, and you're not supposed to write about cheating in the sapphic world.
I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah. So there's definitely subjects that I will happily touch, because I just think that they're reality. And sometimes I know in a romance you want the lovely fantasy of the romance, but I think certainly for me, a lot of my books are a little bit more realistic than that. I don't write super fluffy stuff. That's just not who I am. I'll write a nice romance and they'll definitely have a happy ending, but it won't necessarily be fluffy because I enjoy writing the reality of people's situations. I enjoy writing the hard stuff they've gone through as well as the good stuff.
Yeah.
So
it's a counterpoint to balance it.
Yeah, for me, that's how it works. I still love reading fluffy romances. There's some that I enjoy where I just think, this is lovely. I can totally escape in this for 3 or 4 hours and not worry about a thing. It's lovely.
Yep.
But that's not what I'm going to write.
Yep. So. It's okay. And if you ever write a mystery, don't ever kill a dog.
Or a cat. Or any pet.
It's a no-no.
Oh, yes. That good one. Yes.
We've heard that from a lot of crime fiction authors.
Some did make that mistake. Never again.
Nope. Shouldn't do that. That's the end of it.
I'll make a note of that.
I think you're allowed to kill a spider.
Oh, yeah, spider.
Oh, good.
Okay.
I'm not a fan of spiders.
You can kill people left and right.
You can kill plenty of people,
yes,
but not dogs.
But never a dog or a cat. No, definitely not. I also wanted to ask you about what you wrote in Up on the Roof, because one of your characters comes from a minority group, Lena.
Yes. Yeah.
And did you speak beforehand to people from this?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
The whole idea for writing Lena actually came from a conversation I had. I was at a party and I ended up spending most of the evening with two guys, one from Pakistan, one from India. And they lived in London and they were both facing huge pressure from their families to find the right girl. And they kept being set up for arranged dates, not arranged marriage, but arranged dates. And neither of them were out to their families and they couldn't ever imagine doing it. And they were seriously considering marrying some woman so they could get the pressure off of them. And at the same time, they were like, but how can I do that? How can I? So I had this really big, very important evening with them, learning this side of gay culture that I had not had any experience of before. And I went into work the next day and I worked with a lot of British Indians. And, we were quite close. We often did, nights out and parties and lots of heart-to-hearts and stuff. And I realised that I'd never even touched on this subject with them because I was obviously nervous about hitting a subject that I really wasn't in any place to talk about. I mean, I'm white. What would I know about any of this? But I mentioned to one of the women I work with, and I said, I naively assumed that arranged dates and arranged marriages were all a thing of the past in Britain. And she just laughed at me and said, no. And proceeded to talk to me for an hour about, what it was like for her. And, then another Indian woman came over and she said, oh, what are you talking about? And we told her, oh, yes. She said, I could tell you some stories, sort of thing. And I said, okay, this is absolutely fascinating to me. And I'd love to actually base a character on this. But is that my white privilege showing? Is that going too far? And they were like, oh my God, no, we could give you loads of information, And they were so helpful and so supportive of me writing this. And I thought, okay, they don't speak for the entire British Indian community, but they clearly trusted me with this knowledge to just, write this story. And their support was amazing. And I clearly remember afterwards that I was talking them through what I was writing. I didn't actually want them to read it, and they weren't comfortable reading it because it was lesbian, which was really interesting. But I taught them through what was happening, and they were correcting me and telling me yes, no, things that I was writing. And then I remember after it was published, quite soon after it was published, I got an email from a woman. She said, "I just want to thank you." She said, "I know you're not Indian," she said, "but you might as well have been for the way you wrote this book." She said, "I'm British Indian and you absolutely got it right." And she said, "This is my lived experience. And I can't thank you enough for putting this on the paper." And that's wonderful. And I love it. But I still say something like that with hindsight should be from own voices. I don't regret writing that book. I enjoyed it, but I'm very aware with everything that's happened in the last few years that ideally there would be Indian writers coming forward, Pakistani writers coming forward, and they would be having their books published. And it wouldn't be a book written by a white woman about a British Indian woman. It would be written by a British Indian woman. And I know that it's really hard for women of colour to get published, to get out there. Yeah. I just hope that's something that can be changed. I know there's a lot more focus on it these days, and quite rightly so. And I will actively do whatever I can to help that happen.
Do you think, or would you say that within this very narrow writing community of lesbic authors, there aren't, if at all, any Indian, Pakistani writers?
There definitely are, yeah. Shenin Munir, I think I've pronounced that correctly. She had a book published by Ilva. She's from India. She lives in India. It was a fantastic book. I would highly recommend that. And there are women of colour out there. There are British Indian women. There are Indian women there. But I know that there is still this big unconscious bias in publishing. Yeah. And I'm not saying that on any particular publisher in our world, but you hear so many stories about women of colour trying to reach through to publishing houses, and publishing houses just don't read their manuscripts. And there is this unconscious bias. There's this perception that it won't sell. Straight away, before they've even read what it is, there's a perception, oh, well, yeah, see, that's going to be a little niche market, isn't it? Well, so what? Yeah, it's very hard. And it's so frustrating. I mean, it's frustrating enough being a white cis lesbian trying to get a book published. I can't imagine what it's like for a person of colour or someone who's trans. It's just...
And Angela, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know about future projects, past projects?
Well, obviously, I'm hoping people will be reading Chasing Dreams by the time we broadcast this. And I would like to say that if anybody wants to talk to me about this book or any of my books, or wants to know what I'm working on in the future, you can follow me on Twitter or on Facebook, and I will happily converse left, right, and centre.
That's good to know. Teacup, anything else for our guest I forgot to ask?
I think not at the moment.
You think not at the moment. Okay, then we would like to thank you. It was a great conversation. It was a great chat. It was great fun.
It really was. Thank you so much for including me in this. It was wonderful.
Thank you for agreeing to chat with us. We hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as we did, and we'll meet again at Book Lovers Companion.